end of the conflict. The idea for a permanent war memorial had been kicking around Batavia since the turn of the century, and the conclusion of the First World War provided the impetus to carry the project to completion. The Soldiers and Sailors Monument was dedicated in 1919. The bronze figure is said to be a likeness of Emory Upton, the Civil War general from Batavia. Plaques on 3 sides of the monument recall the wars and battles in which residents of Genesee County have participated. The Great Depression began a decade later. Like other communities, Batavia suffered the losses of jobs and industry. The Batavia and New York Woodworking Company was one of many plants that did not survive. The market for fine woodwork dried up soon after the stock market crash.
As far as manufacturing, anything that had ended with the Depression, they made special doors, like doors for Harvard University and things like that. Well, Harvard stopped making doors when the Depression hit, and they said, well, the last man out, turn out the lights.
With manufacturing jobs all but impossible to find, whole families turned to whatever labor they could find to make ends meet. Dan Winiger recalls a mother and 4 children who worked as farmhands.
Most of our plants, of course, closed during the Depression, which was a terrible blow. But a great many people really scrambled in those days, and nobody really wanted to be on welfare, as it was called. But some couldn't help it, of course. I think of one family where the father was laid off from Massey Harris, but all summer, the mother and 3 sons and a daughter, going down from about 16 on to quite a young girl, all went to work on the muck every day. They went down to Ellicott Square somewhere, and the trucks picked them up, took them to Elba, and then at home we would see them go through our back lot, coming home from work all in a row after a hard day's labor, for I think they got $1, which I think they got $1. Kind of the going rate in those days.
Batavians helped each other get through tough times whenever they could.
People helped quite a bit. I know we had a telephone, and some of our neighbors didn't, and they used the phone at our house to get jobs or help get part-time work, and like taking in laundry and stuff, and they were always welcome there. I remember if anyone died in the neighborhood, someone always went out and collected for a piece from the neighbors. And what they got were quarters, mainly, and some $50. And that was it. But it made up a piece from the neighbors at the funeral parlor.
Extra effort was expended trying to meet the basic health needs of children. Batavians pitched in to help those who needed it most.
Yes, it was at that time that school nurses, about 1935 maybe or so, school nurses noticed kids that didn't have glasses maybe, teeth needed attention, but families couldn't pay it, couldn't afford it. That started the 25 Neediest Children's Fund. The school nurses started that because they saw the kids, and they were the best judges of who needed what. Sometimes people were later able to pay back whatever they were given, and oftentimes they were not, but that didn't matter.
Some Batavia men were forced to rely on government-sponsored work to support their families. Janet Cicere's father worked for the WPA during part of the Depression.
Up till that time, he had what you would call a white-collar job. And when he worked for the WPA, the men that had worked in offices and white-collar jobs and different things did things they were never accustomed to just to get money, to keep their families going. They were out digging ditches, and in the middle of the winter they were out shoveling snow and doing all kinds of whatever needed to be done to earn the money.
Several of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal projects are still with us today. Kibbe Park, the baseball field and bleachers at the as yet unnamed MacArthur Park, and the city's first water tower were all products of the New Deal. Men with no prospects for work sometimes rode the rails during the Depression. Given its network of rail lines, it was inevitable that Batavia would see its share of these men.
There was quite a number, really be an enormous number by today's standards, of men traveling around the country. Some of them were actual tramps who just sponged off everyone, but others were willing to work a day here, a day there, and so on. They infested the railroad, and the railroad detectives were always chasing them out of their boxcars and away from the rails. But then too, there were so many that the police made several cells available at the police station for them to sleep overnight. They came in given an envelope in which they put all their valuables or as a guard against any knives or weapons that they might have, and then they were given a bunk for the night. And when morning came, they got a slip to go over to Rippy's Diner, or Joe's Diner as it was later known, and they got a hamburger and a cup of coffee. And I think the city paid 15 cents. That was it. But a lot of people kept going that way. I don't know how they did it.
Some would go door to door looking for any menial labor.
Some of them would even, sharpen scissors, and they would ask you if you had any work.
With money tight, options for entertainment were vastly curtailed. Still, people made do as best they could.
Well, for entertainment in those days, nobody had much money to go to the movies or anything even. And people more or less amused themselves at home. And they would go down, there was that store on Jackson Street, and you could rent a picture puzzle. And I think it was either 5 or 10 cents. And when you got done with it, you took it back. And you hopefully had 5 or 10 cents more to rent another puzzle. And you could keep it for, there was a time limit, I think, on the days. And then you would take it back. And those were those nice Tuco, the real thick picture puzzles. And we did a lot of walking, because not too many people had cars to travel in those days. And I think people played cards, or you played your board games at home.
The opening of the Veterans Administration Hospital was one bright spot during the Depression. Built in the early 1930s and opened in 1934, the VA brought much-needed jobs to Batavia. And for the lucky ones who got those jobs, life returned to some semblance of normalcy. Janet Cicery, a child at the time, recalls the immediate impact which the VA made on her.
Clothing you made do with what you had. And as I remember, I didn't have too many things, but you would wash it and wear it, and then wear the other outfit, and then that would get washed and worn. And then my dad started working at the Veterans Hospital when they opened. And the first thing he did with the first paycheck, I came home from school and I went in the bedroom, and he and my mother had been down to the children's and Mrs. shop. and bought me a whole new wardrobe, and it was laying on the bed.
The Dellinger Opera House did not survive the Depression. It had been built in 1874. It brought roadshow productions to town in the 1880s and 1890s, and was also used to showcase local talent. On the afternoon of October 12, 1935, Columbus Day, smoke began to rise from the vicinity of the Opera House, which stood near Carr's department store.
I was at the football game at Woodward Field, and Batavia was playing. I don't know who they were playing, but our Batavia high school team was playing. And would you believe Western Union in those days had a messenger who rode a bicycle. He had chaps and a uniform, everything. Up to Woodward Field he rode, going as fast as he could on his bicycle, calling out for Bob Carr, Bob Carr, Mr. Carr, Bob Carr. And he said, I'm Mr. Carr. He said, Mr. Carr, your store's on fire. Everybody looked, there was smoke coming up from Main Street. Everybody left the ball game, the football game. Left running, driving, bicycles, whatever, racing downtown. And it was a terrible fire that had started in the theater, spread to cars, and I think there was another store in between at that time that may have been wiped out entirely. But they called in firemen from all over the county, which didn't have mutual aid yet. And everybody was on his own. They all came. And out at the filtration plant at the creek, where we brought water in from the creek and treated it, the demand for water, of course, immediately shot up, and the small crew there went to work to get the pumps going and pumping all the water they could into the mains. And one of the employees had a heart attack and died right there.
The Opera House was destroyed. Cars suffered smoke and water damage. As the United States entered World War II, Batavia men again joined the armed forces. Many couples saw their relationships put on hold. Janet Cicery had just married when she and her husband said goodbye.
We got married and went to New York for our honeymoon, and the day after we came back, he left for the service. And he didn't come back until the latter part, it was almost 1946. Very last part of 1945.
As these men left for the armed forces, many of their jobs were filled by women at firms such as Chapin and Massey Harris. Often, it was a mix of patriotism and the need for income that drove women into the workforce. Many of these women, though, were not looking for long-term employment.
Well, we were all working because we wanted to help. And I'd say the majority of us had no intentions of staying on in the workforce when the end of the war came, because we wanted our husbands back or our boyfriends, or just to get on with normal life.
Batavia manufacturers such as Doler, which made incendiary shells, and the Rowell Company, which manufactured boxes for the armed forces, contributed to the war effort. Indeed, the Doler firm was honored by the federal government for its efforts during the war. With the war's conclusion, men returned home and took the jobs that many women were happy to vacate. As Janet Cicery put it,
we were just waiting for the war to be over so we could quit.
As men came home and life once again stabilized, couples were anxious to pick up where they left off. Dancing to the music of a live band was popular entertainment at the time. Bill Bird, a local musician, remembers.
Particularly after World War II, the people The boys had been overseas and away, and they came back and they wanted to get out and enjoy with their wives and sweethearts. And so as a result, it was highly popular back at that time.
On many Saturday nights, Bill Bird played at the Richmond Hotel.
Well, of course, I had had a band in this area for a long time, and we had played a lot of high school functions and college functions. And we went into the Hotel Richmond with a 7 or 8 piece band. And the idea was, of course, to provide a Saturday night party atmosphere for the place. And Mr. Morton, Russ Morton, was the owner, operator of it. I don't know that he owned it. And his wife, Ann, was a very lovely person, and she hosted these parties and did a very nice job of it. And we had quite a good crowd of dancing people who came and enjoyed the music for dancing.
It may be difficult today to imagine people dancing at a hotel in downtown Batavia until 1 o'clock in the morning. But there is much about the downtown Batavia of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that is difficult to imagine today. Downtown was where Batavians went to get whatever it was they needed. It seems that everything was available here in town.
Well, anything. They had hardware, they had theaters, they had restaurants, they had clothing stores, they had jewelry stores. They had it all. There wasn't anything almost you couldn't get. They had a plumbing store downtown. They had, they had 2 theaters. In fact, they had more than that at one time. You could find almost anything there. And it was, you never thought about going to Buffalo Rochester to get anything. Now again, I'm going way back. I'm not talking shortly, I'm talking back in the 30s.
Rectory. The concept of the supermarket was yet to arrive. There were also many small, unpretentious eateries in and around the downtown business district. Batavians came to know these establishments as much as a place to gather and chat as to eat. Hotels and inns were plentiful. The Richmond Hotel, of course, dominated the corner at Main and Court. Since 1889, this building had surveyed the comings and goings on Main Street. The Hamilton Hotel at 22 Main had been in operation since 1934. The Genesee Hotel had been on Jackson Street since the early 1800s. On Ellicott Street was the Ellicott House, later known as Panzone's. The Bluebird Inn stood on West Main, near the Holland Land Office. Throughout the city were churches catering to a wide variety of denominations. The First Presbyterian Church, on the corner of East Main and Liberty. On Ross Street was Batavia's old high school, called Union School. Mrs. Mary Richmond gave Batavia's school children the library which is still in use today. Mrs. Richmond's son, Dean Jr., died in 1885. To memorialize her son, she donated to the school district the land on Ross Street, which had been part of the family's orchard. An exquisite building of Medina sandstone in the Italian Renaissance style was then constructed. The library was formally presented to the district in 1889. Batavia was home to numerous breweries over the years. The Gamble family brewed beer in Batavia for decades, beginning in the 1880s. On West Main Street, near Lyon, the Eager family made beer from the 1860s until the early 1900s. The business was purchased by William Crickler. In time, the Crickler and Houseknecht families teamed up to bottle soft drinks at the old brewery. In the 1960s, the firm became the Pepsi-Cola Batavia Bottling Company. But around the turn of the century, there were also numerous one-man beer distributor operations. One of them was on South Main Street, not far from the Eager operation. Joseph Bailey, a German immigrant, lived with his family on an 8-acre farm which bordered the creek. He distributed beer for Rochester's Bartholomew Brewing Company, John Schuessler of Buffalo, and William Simon, also of Buffalo. Bailey had an ice house and warehouse behind his home on South Main. He delivered his kegs to local establishments by horse and buggy. Downtown Batavia was the site of many parades over the years. What appears to be every man, woman, and child attended these parades. It was standing room only along the sidewalks. Main Street was also where residents glimpsed their first view of the animals and performers of the traveling circus which came to town. The circus wagons inched their way down Main Street and camped out at Bogue's 40 Acres on the west end of the city. The automobile brought some of the greatest physical changes to downtown Batavia. Streets that had once been paved with brick, or far more often, not paved at all, began to change. Road building was brutal labor before the introduction of heavy machinery. Men and horses did the best they could to keep dirt roads smooth. Paving, too, had its downside. It was a messy, disruptive process for nearby citizens. More cars meant wider streets downtown. There was a time, for instance, when the area between the courthouse and the Upton Monument was grassy and park-like. Diagonal parking came into vogue, and gas stations multiplied. On West Main, the Diegelman brothers ran an Esso station. Herb, Clem, and Chet Diegelman, all avid hunters, owned the station from 1947 until the late 1950s. It was a popular gathering place for young people. In 1946, the State Department of Transportation announced plans to rebuild Routes 5 and 33. Many residents opposed the plan, fearing the loss of trees and lawns and an increase in traffic. Business owners, though, supported the project as a way to attract more customers to Batavia. City Council gave its approval in 1948. Work began in 1949. It brought substantial changes. This overhead view of West Main Street, looking west, begins at Thomas Avenue. The old Emmanuel Baptist Church can be seen on the right-hand side of the street. Trees line the street and shade the homes along it. The actual construction was a burden for residents and business owners alike. These pictures, taken by the Diegelman family, show the work in progress. On one of the photos, someone has written, "Kinda sad." When completed, Main and Ellicott were certainly wider and more automobile-friendly, but residents had paid a price. Perhaps most lamented was the loss of the canopy created by the trees on East and West Main Street. Of course, some of those trees had already been ravaged by Dutch elm disease. As one resident put it, what Dutch elm disease didn't kill, the DOT finished off. Another piece of Batavia's past that left with the widening of Main Street was the WCTU fountain. It was removed during the construction and was never seen again. Batavia has had numerous car dealerships over the years. Secord and Slocum, for instance, sold Nash automobiles. And Batavia is still home to the oldest family-owned Dodge dealership in the country, Hawley Motors. Batavia was even the site of an auto manufacturing plant, almost. It was to be called the Adria, and it was to be built here in the city in the old Worden Monument Works factory. According to the company, the car had features which placed it well ahead of its time. Unfortunately, the firm proved more expert at selling stock than building cars, and local investors soon found their stock was worthless. The hustle-bustle of Main Street in these decades is best described by those who lived through them.
When I was a young man, the thing to do on Saturday nights was go down shopping, and Main Street was packed. And I mean, it was really packed, and many people would come down in their cars and park early, 6 o'clock or something, and so they could sit and watch people and visit with them.
It was almost like a big reunion on the shopping night. People would come in from the country, the farmers had their work done. That was their one big night to take their car out and use it, to come into the city. And it was fun. You even used to go and sit on Main Street and watch the people, which sounds strange now, but that was what people would do.
Actually, when the city, years ago, when the city was downtown, all the businesses and so forth were concentrated in that 2 or 3 blocks. And it was just like a great big shopping center in the middle of town. And everybody was there on a Saturday night or Friday night. They changed it a little bit. You could see everybody walking the streets.
The innocence and simplicity of the era is striking. For entertainment, families would park on Main Street, see old friends, and top the evening off with a dessert from one of the downtown candy or ice cream parlors.
Well, they would even take the children and put their pajamas on them, and you'd go down and sit in the car and watch the people, and maybe go in the Sugar Bowl or somewhere and buy candy or popcorn or something and take it out to the car, or go to the ice cream place and get your ice cream cones, and that was entertainment. And you might see somebody you hadn't seen in years, and they'd come over to the car and talk and visit. It was a fun thing to do.
Many people came to town on Saturdays, just parked parked on Main Street, just to watch the people go by, see some old friends, talk to them, and all this. And a lot of them ended up, the last place they ended up was the Palace of Sweets or the Sugar Bowl. You might as well be honest about this, because I worked in the Palace of Sweets, and we couldn't sell enough banana splits fast enough on Saturday nights. We couldn't get enough dishes clean to fill them again. It was really wild. And this went on till about 11 o'clock. Died down, everybody had gone back to the farms and back home after having a great big banana split. That was the treat of the week for many, many people. Seems so strange now, but we were really busy filling those banana boats.
These were good times for the downtown business district. During the